People remembered Gaza's dead in different ways over the last 48 hours. In Rafah, this father wept over the body of one of his two children, killed in an Israeli airstrike. In Falmouth last night, a friend of James Henderson addressed a crowd, one of the British workers killed in an Israeli airstrike.
Such a beautiful, beautiful part of all of our lives.
And in Rafah, another friend of someone lost picks through the rubble of another strike, which includes food that came in aid packages.
America's provided some aid to us and lethal aid to Israel, humanitarian aid to us, military aid to them. It's like saying kill them, but kill them nicely.
And there lies the tension internationally, thrown into stark focus since the death of the 7 World Central Kitchen workers on Monday. Pressure is growing on the US and UK governments to suspend arms sales to Israel. Reports today that the drone used in the attack had components manufactured in Britain. At the same time, calls for more aid intensify because of the chilling effect Monday's attack has had on some aid delivery. The founder of WCK accused the IDF of targeting his staff systematically, something the Israelis refute.
So this was not just bad luck situation where, oops, we dropped the bomb in the wrong place, or no, this was over 1.5, 1.8 kilometers with a very defined humanitarian convoy that had signs in the top, in the roof, a very colorful logo that we are obviously very proud of, but that's very clear who we are and what we do.
The IDF said today that the result of their investigation into the incident had concluded and had been shared with Benjamin Netanyahu. A government spokesperson described an adjustment in practices, but did not expound on what that meant.
Clearly something went wrong here. And as we learn more and the investigation reveals exactly what happened and the cause of what happened, we will certainly adjust our practices in the future to make sure that this doesn't happen again.
There was already very little aid getting into northern Gaza, most of it via airdrops. And after Monday's attack, some charities have paused aid deliveries. What's striking, though, the number who have not. With almost 200 aid workers killed, NGOs have had to become used to the violence, and the bulk of the work is being done by people who live there.
The majority of the humanitarian workers are Gazans. They're the ones who are affected by the conflict themselves, and they, while being affected, are trying to deliver the much-needed humanitarian assistance on an ongoing basis.
President Biden spoke with Benjamin Netanyahu over the phone today, their first direct contact since Monday's airstrike. Netanyahu was told that future US support for Gaza depends on new steps to protect civilians and aid workers, and that an immediate ceasefire was essential. Today we spoke to a staffer at the State Department who recently resigned over the US's Gaza policy.
I do think there's increasing frustration with the ways in which Netanyahu continues to go against what President Biden has said he wants Israel to do, what he wants Netanyahu to do. My hope is that there's a realization that U.S. interests and Israeli and the interests of the Netanyahu government do not align here.
The next big test of US versus Israeli interests is not far away. What shape a ground offensive will take in Rafah, southern Gaza? And what will it mean for the 1 million plus people now living there?
Porrick O'Brien, and in the last few minutes, Reuters has reported the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken adding his voice to the hardening line from America, warning if we don't see the changes from Israel that we need to see, there'll be changes to US policy. Well, earlier I spoke to Tess Ingram from UNICEF, who has spent today travelling up and down the Gaza Strip, and I asked her what conditions are like.
I'm in Rafah in the south of the Gaza Strip, and I can tell you that conditions have deteriorated since I was last here in the middle of January. I can see people are tired and hungry. They're telling me that they're kind of at the end of their rope in terms of resilience, and it's clear in terms of infrastructure as well that there's been lots more damage, higher levels of waste, poorer sanitation. So things really are continuing to deteriorate here by the day.
And what is the situation with regard to food?
Food is limited. We're still not getting enough humanitarian aid in. And the very little aid that we are getting in, it's really difficult for us to distribute that across the Gaza Strip to the people that need it, particularly in the north, where we know that a famine can happen at any moment now. I was in a hospital today in the middle area in Deir Balah, and I met so many children who are malnourished, including one boy, Omar, who's 7, who'd come down from the north just 2 days ago. His grandmother said he'd been living on grass.
I mean, we've heard lots of Israeli spokespeople over the last few days saying this is a false narrative, that it's not true that people in Gaza are on the brink of starvation. From what you've seen, are people on the brink of starvation?
Yes. It honestly depends where you are, and the situation is worse the higher up you go through the Gaza Strip. So the middle area compared to Rafah, it's worse. North compared to the middle area, worse again. And I honestly was shocked today, Krishnan, at this hospital in the middle area by the number of children and adults that I saw who looked incredibly malnourished. And the head of paediatrics there told me that the number of cases he's admitting in general have gone up 3 times. And of those, 90% of the children that are being admitted have malnutrition.
So what is the problem in terms of getting the aid that is coming across the border out? I mean, Israel says there is more aid coming in now than there was before. So where is it?
Well, I don't agree that there's more aid coming in now than there was before. I just had a look at the numbers that we have on the trucks coming in. And since the beginning of March, we've averaged 156 trucks a day. Now, before the war, it was 500. The little aid that we do get in, we then have to take it through a war zone. These 2 crossings that we have are both in the south. So we then have to traverse the entire Gaza Strip. And as we saw with the tragic incident on Monday night where our colleagues were killed, it's not safe here. The systems that are meant to protect us are not functioning. And then on top of that, there's all sorts of logistical issues like damage to roads, crowded streets, telecommunications blackouts. It's really, really difficult.
And has that strike on the World Central Kitchen convoy now made a difference again this week? Has it reduced the amount of aid getting to people?
Well, World Central Kitchen was one of the main players distributing food here. They've paused their operations along with some other NGOs, so I'm sure that is going to have an impact. And of course, some of the food that they were going to unload turned around and went back in the opposite direction, which is just heartbreaking to see when we know kids are dying from malnutrition. We as the UN are staying and delivering, but, you know, again, it's not easy and we have to do so much more.
The numbers are quite mind-boggling, though. I mean, you know, World Central Kitchen, for example, said that there were hundreds of thousands of meals per day that were now cancelled. Now, does that mean that there are hundreds of thousands of people who are going hungry?
Yeah, that's right. The food and the aid is so scarce that a lot of people are relying on a meal a day. So if they're not getting that one meal from World Central Kitchen, or they're not able to get an aid delivery from WFP that contains flour to make bread, then they're probably not going to eat that day. And I've spoken to families that have told me that's the case. They're sharing maybe one tin of beans between, you know, 4 or 5 people.
Can I also just ask you about the sort of the attempts to get aid in through the sea? I mean, you know, we've heard this American idea of building sort of pontoon. You know, what difference are those operations likely to make? How long will they take to make a difference?
Well, some of them we've been told are more than 6 months away, and we just don't have 6 months to wait. The children of Gaza need food now, not in 6 months' time. But that aside, the most efficient way to get food in is through land routes. And there are other land routes that we can open that would take us straight into the north, 10 minutes away from where these kids are dying of malnutrition. So to us, that's the best option. And we're really advocating hard for these extra crossings to be open. There's no reason why we can't open one of them.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm joined now from Oslo by Jan Egeland, the Secretary-General of the Norwegian Refugee Council and a key diplomat in the Oslo process of the 1990s. The American language is really ratcheting up tonight, with the Secretary of State apparently saying if Israel doesn't change course, American policy will change. But America is still sending Israel weapons. So what does this language really mean?
Well, it would hopefully mean something if there is some teeth to the diplomacy finally. I do sense a change now. I hope this is a watershed moment. 6 international aid workers were killed after 200 Palestinian aid workers have been killed. And now it's sinking in capitals like Washington, London, Berlin, that they have had a diplomacy that has had an astounding impotence. They haven't been able even to help us to get aid to the children of Gaza, but they have been willing to provide the tools for this indiscriminate assault on the civilian population. I think things will change, but there has to be sanctions. There has to be much more teeth to the diplomacy.
What do you mean by sanctions? What do you want to see?
Well, I would like to see, for example, we will not provide you the tools for the destruction and bombs like the Americans seem to now be giving, which are indiscriminate. I mean, it's heavy bombs, taking down entire apartment houses and so on. We won't do that until you have a deconfliction system that the humanitarians can work on and with. We have access through many border crossings and end with these ridiculous airdrops and also the very chaotic maritime route. There is a ceasefire ending the indiscriminate attacks, and there is also a start of some kind of a political process to end all of this.
Right, and having been, I know you were in Gaza as well recently. I mean, how can you get the aid moving? You know, it's clear that people are starving. How can you get it moving now in a safe way?
By opening up several road crossings. They're called Karni and Erez in the north. They are like 25 minutes by road to Gaza City, where people are in famine. They're not starving. They're in famine. There's no other way to describe it. By also, I would say, countries like UK and US, why haven't they organized their own convoys into Gaza? They can under international law. How come Israel is allowed to control all going in, even over the Egyptian Gaza border? International law says you have to enable and force relief to people who are starving if there is a belligerent that is denying it.
Is that because the world has dehumanized the Palestinians?
I think there is an element of that. And I think there's also a large scale of hypocrisy here. I think the rest of the world is saying, how come it's so bad with Russian occupation in Ukraine and with Russian bombing of civilian targets and denying people electricity and water, when it seems to be acceptable in the Palestinian case? Even arms and political and other support has not been denied. So the moral authority of our main donors is also at stake here. I think things are changing. I sense a change now. I think this is a watershed moment. I see the discussion in London, in Washington, and even in Berlin now saying enough is enough. Israel cannot continue as they have.
Jan Egeland, thank you very much indeed. Aisha.
Thanks, Chris. Channel 4 News has been told that officials in the Department for Business and Trade have threatened to stop working over UK arms sales to Israel. It comes after the publication of a letter signed by over 600 lawyers warning that the UK could be failing its obligations under international law. Our senior political correspondent Paul McNamara is in Westminster. Paul.
Yes, these are officials, we understand, involved with the overseeing of the export of arms to Israel. Their fear that what they're being asked to do may break international law, and that under international law, ignorance is no defence. In the last few minutes, the head of bargaining at the PCS union, Paul O'Connor, has told Channel 4 News, quote, "We believe that the UK government has an obligation to do all it can to halt the onslaught. As it does not appear to be willing to do so, we are seriously considering taking legal action to prevent our members from being forced to carry out unlawful acts." They go on to add, "We do not take such cases lightly, and we only do so where we have reasonable prospect of winning." Important to add, the government have responded to this. They've said, quote, "We keep advice on Israel's adherence to international humanitarian law under review and will act in accordance with that advice. All export license applications are assessed on a case-by-case basis against the strategic export licensing criteria." But look, it's not just these officials that have an issue with arms sales to Israel at the moment. Three Supreme Court judges and 597 other of the most preeminent voices in the legal profession have an issue with it too. They've written to the Prime Minister saying that they want a ban on arms sale. We caught up with one of the senior barristers this afternoon. This is what he had to say.
We've called for a ban on arms sales because the arms could be used in acts of genocide in Palestine. The letter hasn't identified specific UK arms which have been used in the past, but the concern is that they may be used in future. And it's in order to try to prevent that that we say a ban is appropriate.
And is that what you believe is going on in Palestine now? A genocide? It's a very punchy word to be using.
It's a very punchy word and it has a very specific legal meaning. There is a serious risk of genocide. The UK is a party to the Genocide Convention and that gives it certain obligations. And one of the obligations comes about where there's a serious risk of genocide. So it's quite specific words that are used to define what's going on. If there is a serious risk of genocide, then what the UK is required to do is to take all reasonable steps to try to avoid it.
Look, the government is constantly receiving legal advice. Labour have asked for that legal advice to be made public. Do you want it to be made public?
This is, again, it's not something that appears in the letter, but personally, yes, I'd welcome that legal advice is made public. I'm sure the majority of the population would do. This is such an issue of public concern, national and international concern, then it calls for greater openness than there might normally be on the part of government.